Episode 19 of the Average Joe Sports Show. It's Chris Schmidt, Nebraska, Wisconsin, more heartache.
Chubba Purdy. Did we see the birth of Nebraska's next great quarterback?
Hi, it's Bill Doleman. What's Matt Rhule's advice for Tony White?
And Elijah Herbel here. We'll wrap this show by talking Brian Ferentz, his last game as an Iowa Hawkeye coach.
Episode 19 is here. It's the Average Joe Sports Show. Bill Doleman, Mitch Sherman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Fellas, Nebraska fell. Again, a third straight loss, this time in overtime, 24-17 to them Badgers. Nebraska trying to right the ship here on a three-game losing streak, get bowl eligible, and, beat Iowa for consecutive years for the first time since the Pelini era. Mitch, how were the cookies in the press box?
Well, that's not the highlight of the spread that Wisconsin had. You know, one thing I learned this weekend, that Wisconsin and Iowa both have salad bars in the press box. I've been
for real salad bars?
Been in both stadiums many times, both press boxes many times. You know, partaken in these media food festivities that happen before the game, and never really put it together that they both, I don't know if it's like an upper Midwest old style Big Ten type of thing, but there's a salad bar at the Camp Randall press box, also brats and some, I mean, what goes better with a salad than a brat, but and some wraps, and then a lot of cookies. I ate a lot of cookies, but I did see that my coworker Scott Docterman in Iowa City was tweeting about the salad bar at Kinnick, and I've experienced that before. I don't think it's every game.
I didn't see it last Black Friday. I don't remember it.
They do they do a Thanksgiving salad bar for their last home game, and in this season it was Saturday against Illinois, so it might not be an every game thing. But anyway, the cookies were fine in Badgerland. Got Wisconsin. They really truly care about the physical fitness and the amount of steps that us media members get to walk. Not complaining at all, unless it's like below 20 degrees, then I'm complaining. Mm-hmm. But it was a relatively nice November night in Madison, so the 1 mile walk, which is not a big deal, but it is when it's 11 o'clock at night after the game and still got 4 hours of work to do.
I would assume that a salad bar in Wisconsin would be like pierogies, pretzels, and brats with a lettuce wrap around it.
Some sort of cheese.
No, it was surprisingly healthy lettuce. It was like spinach lettuce, and then there were some shredded cheese and some croutons and tomatoes. I was surprised. That's it's not your normal Wisconsin fare, but good trip overall. I didn't get to Madison until about 3 o'clock on Saturday. Spent the day in Chicago on Friday. Got some holiday flavor. That was nice. The Big Ten. We get a lot of Chicago in the Big Ten, and I hadn't had much of it this football season because the Illinois game was a day of game travel. So I enjoyed my time in the Windy City on Friday. I did not go to the Chicago Bulls in-season tournament game that was happening.
The court would have blinded you anyway.
It did.
So.
I was watching it. I got some deep dish pizza at a place called Labriola's just off of Michigan Avenue near my hotel on Friday night, and I ordered it, and then I was waiting at the bar, and I noticed the Bulls were playing, and I couldn't see the basketball because the court was like the same color as the basketball. Yeah. Just a slight different shade. It was red, and the ball was orange, but there was a long throw down the court, and I'd lost the ball. So I'm glad I wasn't at pay to go.
Just a random aside, I don't know why the NBA thought that awful-looking uniforms and neon courts would be what would bring the kids into basketball for the in-season tournament. I don't
Oregon.
I did it though.
Nah, the unis.
I mean, they have the ugliest basketball court in America too, with their stupid.
But I'm saying the wardrobe options of yesteryear from Oregon. It's been around about 15 years.
Yeah, I mean
I think that's what the NBA.
They've got a niche there.
Yeah, they do.
Well, this being the Average Joe Sports Show, let's go down just a different path for a moment here.
You don't like this?
How's everybody's
Cookies
bracket?
and salad bars.
How is everybody's bracket doing on that NCAA or NBA midseason tournament?
Haven't filled one out, Bill.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought that's just what we might be doing here because, quite frankly, I'm not watching it. I'm not sure who is watching it, and it is difficult to watch it because you can't find the ball, you can't find the players amidst the Where's Waldo backdrop of the court. So, great idea, I guess.
I was vaguely aware that it existed before I saw it on TV.
I'm not sure the purpose.
Yeah.
We're talking about it.
They're using European soccer as the model of, like, trying to find a reason to make regular season important. Oh, like, this is going to be more important than your regular season game, but it's not. None of the players care anymore. And then they use, like, the European model of, like, we have group play first, and then the top two teams from each group advance to the tournament in Las Vegas. And then I think, whichever team wins the tournament, their players get cash bonuses. Is that right?
Oh, that's good.
They need more cash. They should have an in-season tournament in the Big Ten West and see how that goes. It's maybe the only way that the Big Ten West teams are actually going to play something beyond just the normal regular season games because very few of them are getting bowl eligible. Now, Northwestern did on Saturday. Northwestern, the second Big Ten team after Iowa to get bowl eligible with that victory against Purdue in Evanston that I think, I don't know, maybe more than 10,000 people attended it. I did see in the Chicago Tribune it got like a 100-word write-up, which is kind of sad and shocking because you have Ryan Braun now. I'm sorry, David Braun. I knew I was going to do that.
It's okay.
Not Ryan Braun, not the baseball player, but David Braun. Man, I have avoided doing that all year. Big Ten Media Days, saw the guy. But anyway, he what a great story there with David Braun and just not getting any kind of love in Chicago. Didn't hear anybody talking about Northwestern when I was in Chicago on Friday.
Well, speaking of the weirdness of the Big Ten West here, I looked this stat up over the weekend because I saw it the weekend before and I wanted to check. This is still a season with only 3 teams currently being bowl eligible, in that only one overall team in the Big Ten West has positive point differential this season in Iowa. Wisconsin got
it's kind of surprising that Iowa does.
Wisconsin got back to even this weekend. They have scored 151 points and allowed 151 points this weekend. Everyone else negative point differential this year.
It would be like total Iowa if Iowa was 10-2 and had a negative point differential.
Yeah.
If Nebraska beats them by 19,
they'll be
on
9-3.
Saturday, they'll be back under on their positive point differential.
It could be at 9-3.
We'll see.
If Nebraska wins by 19, though, the problem is that they would become positive in point differential for the year. They're currently 129 points for, 145 points against.
And that's what they're playing for.
Yeah, that point differential. The Average Joe Sports Show. Be sure to find us on YouTube, the AJ Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod. Find that on Twitter. And as always, download the podcast, Spotify, and iTunes. Well, Nebraska, again, another chance to get bowling. It didn't happen, but there were some surprises along the way. A lot of surprises from Saturday night. 1, Nebraska's offensive output. 2, kind of a less stellar defensive performance from a tackling standpoint, although the Black Shirts were really big time with 2 big-time fourth-down stops. And just a kind of a strange game with, wow, you didn't expect this offensively. And then Nebraska, again, Mitch, you get down to a 2-minute drill situation and same result, but a different approach for Nebraska in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I'm using here that we're talking about this offensive explosion for Nebraska, and it took a field goal at the end of the game to get to 17 and force overtime.
Look good early.
But the first 10 minutes of the game, I mean, you would have thought you were watching the 1983 Huskers, or at least like the 19,
the backups.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't the scoring explosion. Let's just say that. But 2 drives, and it was explosive. First, Chubba Purdy taking off on a 55-yard run where he turned on. He had a gear on that run that I don't know that a lot of people thought that Chubba possessed,
including the Wisconsin defense.
Right, and that certainly had something to do with it. They see him coming around the corner. You think he's going to slide when he gets past the first down marker, and then all of a sudden, zoom. He's gone. They've talked about Chubba Purdy being one of the faster guys on the Nebraska team, and I thought it just meant that everybody was really slow. But, apparently he does have some legit speed, and he is an athlete. And we saw that repeatedly on Saturday, but in particular on that first drive where he took off and went 50-plus yards, and then he hits Jalen Lloyd the next time out, and it's like, what is going on here? That was a dime that he threw, deep route across the middle. Lloyd catches it, puts a move on a safety, bounces off a tackle. Wisconsin appears to have zero interest in running him down, which they're not going to do anyway because Jalen Lloyd's a 4-4 guy, and it's 14-0. I'm thinking Nebraska's on their way to 35 points in this game, but of course don't score again until there's 1 second left.
You know, what was amazing was how ill-prepared I thought Wisconsin was for Chubba Purdy. And maybe I thought that going into the game that maybe Nebraska did have an advantage if they did go with Purdy. Because let's face it, the most extensive game tape of Purdy probably goes back to his days in high school. He played, 4 games for Florida State 3 years ago? Was non-existent last year at Nebraska. For the most part, non-existent this season except for one drive. So if you're going to scout Nebraska's quarterback situation, and nobody really knew until, Friday afternoon, that it was probably going to be Purdy. And then Saturday, I think everybody knew that it was. But Wisconsin did not seem to adjust or have – they did adjust in the second half. But Wisconsin did not seem to be prepared for what he would be capable of doing, throwing the football and with his speed. And so it was really impressive to start. There was one moment in the second half when it looked like he was limping a little bit, that maybe there was an issue with his with the groin injury, maybe resurfacing. But I thought Nebraska played an ace by putting him out there first because I don't think Wisconsin was ready.
Yeah, I don't think Wisconsin was all that fired up to play. And Wisconsin kind of continued with this type of play that the Badgers showed the week prior against Northwestern, where they just weren't interested and barely showed up. And it looked like that was going to be the story of the day. And for whatever reason, after Nebraska got ahead 14-0, maybe they recognized that this was that's too much. We can't allow that to happen. I mean, if Nebraska wants to beat us, fine. We're letting Northwestern and others, who Indiana beat the Badgers before Northwestern did. That's okay, but we're not going to come in here and get embarrassed on Senior Day at our home stadium. Something woke them up.
Do you think it was that fourth down play then? Do you think that when they made that stop?
So I felt like that in the moment, and I felt like that as the second half dragged along. And I don't mean that in a way that Nebraska. Well, I did write that I think Nebraska remains a fragile team, and that it didn't respond when Wisconsin delivered a punch after the fourth down play. And I asked Matt Rhule about that after the game, and he was having none of that and said, I don't think that's the case, and I didn't see any kind of lack of emotion or poor confidence from our team. He said, I think it's just the ebb and flow of the game where teams trade punches. But no, I still think there's something to that. Certainly in the momentum of the game, when Nebraska got in a 4th-and-1 situation at the 33-yard line on the Wisconsin side of the field, and it was 14-0, you're thinking at that moment, hey, if Nebraska goes in and gets another 33 yards here, they convert this 4th down, they score, they reach the end zone, and it's 21-0.
It's over.
I think it's over. With Nebraska, you never know, but
especially with the fragility of Wisconsin at that point in the game. They seemed like a fragile football team when they were down 14-0.
They got some life from that for sure, and then the drive right after that, they kind of got into that tempo mode, and there were 2 drives in the game, or was 2 or 3, where Wisconsin got into some good tempo and some good rhythm, and Nebraska's defense was back on its heels. And we haven't seen that a lot this year, with the exception of the Michigan game and the second half against Colorado, where this defense just didn't really have an answer. Even times where they've kind of been able to put up a wall when the opponent gets on the Nebraska side of the field. And a lot of that's via substitution and just bringing in new waves of defenders. But a couple times in that Wisconsin game, they did get back on their heels, and that was the first time right there, right after that turnover on downs. I thought it was a huge momentum shift in the game. Maybe it wasn't damaging to Nebraska's psyche, and I'll agree with Matt Rhule there. I'll take his word for that. He knows his team better than I do. But momentum, yeah, that's where Wisconsin got back into it.
And they also into it.
They made adjustments in that first half too, and I think this is a game where, looking back upon my rewatch, it looked like Nebraska was solidly outcoached on both sides of the football. Because you talk about Wisconsin using the tempo, something else they did is they really used Braylon Allen to keep their offense in rhythm in a way that they hadn't done in previous weeks and that they didn't do early in the game. I said it last week on this show that this season when Braylon Allen got 20-plus carries, Wisconsin had not lost. He'd only had that twice this season, and it wasn't Braylon Allen's best day as a Badger. It wasn't a banner day he's going to look back on and say, man, it's a career day. It wasn't that by any means for Braylon Allen, but he really kept that offense in rhythm with, I think it ended up being 24 rushes on the day. I could be wrong.
23 for 66.
Yeah, so not his best day ever, but they used him well to keep that offense in pace, keep him to third and manageable. And to be fair, whenever you look at what the Husker defense has done this year, you don't think that a run-heavy game plan is going to be the option that Wisconsin's going to go with. That didn't seem to be their game plan early, but they found some success whenever they went tempo with Braylon Allen and really turned to that as the game went on. You saw how their offense found success following that point. I think you have to credit Phil Longo making the in-game adjustment and saying, hey, we got a guy in Braylon Allen that he might not bust off a 40-yard run, but he's pretty consistently getting us 4 or 5, and we're going to keep turning to that. And once Wisconsin really solidly went with that rushing attack, turned to it on first and second down a lot more, you saw how their offense responded.
I agree that Nebraska got out-coached on both sides. I mean, when you make coaching is about making adjustments, and maybe Nebraska gets the edge, like you said, Bill, and catching Wisconsin off guard with Chubba Purdy, and there's a chess piece on Nebraska's side of the board. Good move. You kept this somewhat under wraps. I mean, certainly Chubba's 2 starts last year in Lincoln don't tell you anything about the kind of quarterback that he was. He was ineffective in both of those games, so they didn't have tape. They didn't know what Chubba was going to present. So that's a point for Nebraska. But then after 14-0, certainly the Wisconsin defense gets the nod against Nebraska offensively, and I agree with you about what Wisconsin did offensively to kind of get Nebraska defense out of its game. And once they were out of their game, then they could start running Mordecai, who's a savvy guy, not having a great year, not what Wisconsin thought they were getting from him. Perhaps that has something to do with the lack of receivers and injuries that they've had, and they don't have a great tight end at Wisconsin this year like they've often had. And Barry Alvarez must not have another grandson. So
now that's ready. Yeah.
So and special teams too. You talk about losing the battle on both sides of the ball in the coaching matchup. Special teams, it really went against Nebraska. Buschini had a rough game, had to down one of his own punts at midfield. Nebraska had a missed field goal late in the first half. Think about that. If they make that field goal and the second half goes as it otherwise did. And the return game, again, it just wasn't there for Nebraska. It was somewhat of a wash. Wisconsin had a couple of decent returns, but nothing that changed the shape of the game. Really, like Rhule said in talking about what Nebraska can expect against Iowa this week, which is going to take that special teams pressure up a few notches from what Wisconsin did, he compared Iowa's special teams play to the Belichick-Parcells NFL model, where they kick it off to the 3-yard line and make you return the opening kickoff to the 15, if that's what you can get. And then they just start tilting that field against you and tilting it and tilting it and tilting it until it turns into a touchdown for the good guys on the Belichick-Parcells side. And Wisconsin did a little bit of that to Nebraska too.
Or in the case of Iowa, might not be a touchdown, but it could be a safety.
Hey, game started out 3-2 against Coach Bielema in Illinois. It's the Average Joe Sports Show. Find us on YouTube, the AJ Sports Show, Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Give both of those a follow. Spotify and iTunes, where you can download it. Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, and Chris Schmidt. Let's talk about the topic of Chubba and kind of that wow factor. We've touched on how well he played, but we'll kind of mix what we just saw last Saturday into some expectations against an Iowa defense, and then the question of why was Chubba not playing sooner rather than later? And I know Coach Rhule addressed that today.
Yeah, let's also talk about what the future might be for him. I think
I'm excited if I'm a Nebraska fan that he's played one drive and one ball game, but looks pretty good.
Or are you a little concerned? The transfer portal opens next week, and you wonder how Chubba feels about Nebraska and if he can be done with school. And I don't know what his academic progress is at, but he's in his 4th year of college. So if he graduates, he's got options, and there'll be suitors for sure. I don't know that anything's happened at Nebraska over the last 2 years when he hasn't been eligible to transfer because he's an undergrad and he's already transferred once. I don't know that anything has happened here that's going to make him feel this great desire to stay. And that's concerning for Nebraska because for the first time, under Matt Rhule at least, it has a quarterback who could have a future in the offense that Marcus Satterfield wants to run. So we can get back to that, but as far as why he hasn't played, I mean, I'll touch on it briefly, and I think it's got everything to do with the fact that this coaching staff put too many eggs, all of its eggs, in the Jeff Sims basket starting basically a year ago at this time. And we're into the week now when Matt Rhule was hired last year. And as soon as he came on board, he had this friend, Jeff Collins, at Georgia Tech, and he had followed that quarterback. And they said, let's go get him. And he went into the portal, and there was not a big recruiting process by other schools. He landed at Nebraska without any drama, and he didn't have to compete, really. I mean, let's be real about it. It was Sims' job from the beginning of spring practice. Now, that's not how it was necessarily portrayed, but we know what happened, and that's why Casey Thompson transferred, and that's why Logan Smothers transferred, and you had Heinrich Harburg and Chubba Purdy who were buried on the depth chart, and Sims goes out, and it didn't work out for 2 games. And when they needed to make a change because he was hurt, Chubba was hurt too. Otherwise, he may have been the first guy in the game against Colorado. If you take Matt Rhule at face value with what he said out in Boulder in September, Chubba may have been the guy to go into that game, but he was banged up. So Harburg went in, he comes home, starts, wins 5 out of 6 games, and that pretty much gets us to November. It does get us to November. So I think that's basically what you need to know about Chubba Purdy and what his progression was through this season and why we didn't really see him until that last drive against Maryland.
Because he looks like the guy that was a top 10 dual threat in the country. He looks like Norvell's first quarterback recruit ever to build his foundation. I mean, and he looks night and day from what he's looked like in brief appearances in Lincoln and a brief appearance at Florida State.
Well, we said this a couple of weeks ago, and probably more than once, that we did not think Nebraska's quarterback of the future was on campus. Based on a small sampling of the last game in a series, you would have to say that Chubba Purdy, if healthy, is certainly somebody who would be an adequate, and that's pretty high praise for the quarterback play they've gotten this year, serviceable and adequate, but could be a solid quarterback in what Nebraska's vision is for the offense. If you're Purdy, you have to look back at how the quarterback situation was handled a year ago. Casey Thompson was hurt, right, after the season, underwent shoulder surgery, did not go through winter conditioning and spring football, and they brought in the transfer. And Purdy has to have been savvy enough to think, this is Sims' job, Thompson doesn't have a chance. Okay, how am I going to be treated then after this season is over with? Am I going to have a legitimate chance to compete for the job? Because everybody knows Nebraska is going to go after somebody. Am I going to have a legitimate chance to compete with my buddy Heinrich and whoever they bring in to be the starting quarterback at Nebraska? And if he looks back at past history, the answer is probably no. But if he has a good relationship with Matt Rhule and Marcus Satterfield, then maybe he does have an opportunity next year.
That's the big difference, is that Chubba's been in the system for a year with these coaches, and he can have some trust there, and there's been a relationship built up. You know, much like the situation that existed when Matt Rhule took over this team, and there were good coaches, and who he's called good coaches on that defensive staff that he chose not to keep just because he wanted to bring in his guys. Well, that's kind of the way it went with Jeff Sims and Casey Thompson also. So, well, Chubba now is a Matt Rhule guy, and he's been here for a year with Matt Rhule. So I think, yes, while he has to look at the portal and see what Nebraska does, look at the portal. I'm saying Chubba has to look at the portal as far as what Nebraska is going to do in the portal. He may want to be here and not have any interest in transferring himself. That's a different discussion. So if Nebraska is to take, let's just say, Tyler Show, the quarterback who announced on Sunday night that he's leaving Texas Tech to be a 24-year-old, sixth-year senior quarterback somewhere in college football next year. He has played the last 2 years for Joey McGuire, who is a Matt Rhule guy through and through, and could come to Nebraska and play for Garrett McGuire and Marcus Satterfield and Matt Rhule. Now, I don't know if there's interest there on the part of Tyler Show. Maybe he looks at Nebraska and says, I don't want to be a part of that offensive system. I want to go. He wants to play in the NFL. He's 6'5". Maybe he wants to play somewhere where offense is going to be showcased. probably not the greatest advertisement for a transfer quarterback to hear Matt Rhule say today that all the teams that he's coached at every level have generally been great on defense and average on offense. I mean, okay, I guess you're saying somebody come on down, step on up and make this offense great for me here. We'll see. If Nebraska ends up with a guy like Tyler Show, who's a high-profile quarterback out of the portal, and I'm just using his name as like the example of who the kind of player it could be, then I think Chubba Purdy has to look real hard at what his options are outside of Lincoln.
But without a doubt, Purdy can be effective in this offense and be a quality backup, which I don't think Nebraska has really had quality backup or set in stone backup, whatever I'm trying to come up with. That this is the guy that can get the job done as a backup quarterback.
He wants to start. He's at the place in his career where he wants to start. You know, it's not like he's a second-year guy. He's going into year 5. So would Chubba be willing? You know, do you have to? Do you feel good enough about Chubba, Bill, that you would be willing to go in the portal if you're Nebraska and get somebody who's more developmental? Like a player who's been in college for a year or two and you think can be a piece for you down the road, but you don't want to get a quarterback who scares Chubba away. Are you in that spot after watching Chubba now for one drive plus one game where you feel like it would impact your decision as a coaching staff to get a more developmental quarterback because you think Chubba can be your guy?
See, and that's the problem with the portal, though. If somebody's going into the portal, just like the Slow at Texas Tech, they're in there because they want to start. They're not going to some other place to compete. You know, nobody is going into the transfer portal thing. There's a couple of guys over there, and I want to be in that mix, and I think I can win the job. No, they want the job. So if Chubba Purdy's going to stay here or whomever, whatever Nebraska's plans are, whoever's going to come here is going to come here with the expectation, probably like Jeff Sims did, that I'm going to be the starting quarterback and everybody else is fighting for the number 2 spot.
Yeah, Show's not going anywhere to sit. I mean, 6th-year guy, no way.
Slow. Show.
No, yeah.
I look at, and maybe this is a rush to judgment, but I look at what he's done and I look at his difference, his calm, his ability. And if I'm a Nebraska fan, I can actually get excited for what this offense can become with some of the youth they have, the ability to run the football, probably some more quarterback run. I mean, Chubba's a guy that can do that, showed that. Would like to see a little more of it, not to the short side in the second half if I'm Nebraska. But I think real hard about what I go do at quarterback if I'm Nebraska. And I don't, to your point, I don't spook him. Have you seen enough from Chubba?
Not even close.
No?
Not even close. I mean, it's a small sample size, yes, but...
Is it injury you're worried about?
No, something I said following the Northern Illinois game when we were talking about Heinrich Harburg was that wise men draw observations from one game, one start, and foolish men draw conclusions. I'm not ready to draw conclusions on Chubba Purdy just yet. I mean, he's going to go up against a very good defense in Iowa, and it's going to be hard to get a gauge on a guy when you're going and playing that defense.
These are 2 good sample sizes, though, right? You finished the year against Wisconsin, and then you wrap it with Iowa.
I mean, I think you have to look at the entire season as a whole and ask yourself, ask yourself why he wasn't on the field.
Yeah.
Whether it's injuries or whether it's you don't trust the guy as much as the other guys, both of those are reasons why you can't go into next season trusting this guy to be your starting quarterback.
But could you be wrong? Could you be wrong with your judgment like you were when you went all the eggs in the one basket with Sims?
Well, you can be wrong keeping around Chubba, too, and using this 2-game sample size as your sample size to say, you know what, this could be our guy moving forward. I think from what I've seen this season, it's incontestable that Nebraska needs to go into the transfer portal. I don't think you can sit around and look at the guys that didn't lead you to wins this season and say, well, we don't want to lose that guy. Obviously, there's the element of the shiny object in the window that you want to go get from the store, you know, and that is a concern in my eyes that, yeah, there's always going to be a shiny something in the window, especially in the transfer portal. But you have to look at the performance of the quarterback room as a whole this season and ask yourself, well, why didn't they turn to Chubba sooner? And
that's my big question.
If it's because of injuries, then I think you have to take that into account whenever you're looking at the quarterback. I mean, playing games is really, really important, and if a guy can't stay healthy, I think that's a reason to go to the portal. And if it's because you didn't trust him from what you saw in practice, again, another reason that you have to go to the transfer portal.
Here's another problem, though. What's the post-spring portal like? Didn't Thompson and Smothers leave after spring ball? So you bring somebody in, and everybody says, "Yeah, I'm in. I want to stay."
Oh yeah,
right. And then in the spring doesn't go very well, and you bring in the portal guy or whatever. You might be stuck with one. This is not to eliminate Heinrich Harburg from the conversation, okay? I think he has earned the opportunity to remain in that room, although I still think Nebraska thinks
he's going to be a tight end.
I think he's going to play a different position, right? I think he's going to play a different position by the time his career at Nebraska is done. But if you go to the portal and somebody says, yeah, I'm going to stay, or I'm going to come in, and then spring ends, and the transfer or the guy who stayed doesn't get the job, somebody's gone again, and then you're down to one.
You have to dodge the bad situation twice. That's just the way that the system is set up now, so that you potentially can lose a guy in December, and then you can also lose him in May.
Yeah,
and there's no way.
That's a bad system.
But I think what Chubba is playing for here at the end of the year, whenever you talk about the portals, is Nebraska going to get one guy in the portal or two guys in the portal? Because I think you have to go get a guy that is going to expect to start next year at Nebraska. I haven't seen enough from the quarterback room this year to show me otherwise. Maybe Chubba goes and has a fantastic game against Iowa, and I have to change my tune. But against that defense, I think what Chubba is playing for is an opportunity to be in the running next year at the quarterback spot.
Totally agree with that, but you cannot. No two quarterbacks are going to transfer to the same place. That's just not going to happen.
You need one in the room. You need one in the room and then one in the portal. Let them have the old steel cage death match. You have your starter, and if they like it, here they stay. Probably not. And then you just need some guy that can step up, play at a high level, get you bowl eligibility, get you contention, be somebody that's probably borderline, at least all Big Ten third team. Worst case scenario. And is Chubba a guy like that we can anoint that? Absolutely not. And I see his upside, though. I think he's a guy that just needed to play and get some confidence. I think that's why he looked so calm against Wisconsin, because he's ran scout team and he's gotten comfortable. And then they did a hell of a job of prepping him for Wisconsin. I mean, he just looked. That's the best quarterback plays Nebraska's had since Casey's been here. Period.
Since
Casey Thompson.
Yeah, all the way back then, last year.
Yeah, I'm serious.
No, I mean that wasn't that long ago, is what I'm saying.
No, I know.
Feels like a hell of a long time ago.
It feels a long time ago.
I mean, just to say that it was the best quarterback play Nebraska's had this season, that is
what is that?
Lot,
9 drives.
That is a lot to handle if you're a Nebraska fan, because he was sitting there number 3 at the beginning of the year, or maybe he was number 2, but
Just don't screw up the injury. Guy that should be starting.
The injury stuff, it kind of clouds the picture.
It does,
because if we're to believe Rhule that he'd have been first off the bench if they were both healthy in Boulder, you're looking at a completely different situation potentially. Mm-hmm. So, and hey, that sports hernia injury that he's got, it's no joke.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's no joke. And we talked last week about how guys go to Germany for this surgery. So. It's not like they just said, oh, Chubba's got a a sore leg and
lower body injury.
Whatever, yeah, like wink, wink. Actually, what it is, the problem is he's not as good as the player in front. Who's playing. He was legit. He's legit hurt, and he's still hurt. Mm-hmm. So that also enters the picture when you have this conversation about whether he's somebody that you want to invest your future in. He's still hurt. And he's got to have that thing fixed. And there's no guarantee he's going to come back and it's all going to be good.
Then it's just the same story as Casey Thompson a year ago. Season's over with. You're going to have an off-season surgery. You're probably going to miss a great deal of winter conditioning and may not be ready for spring ball. You bring in a transfer quarterback, da-da-da-da-da, and here we go, rinse and repeat for 2024.
Can you take another year of quarterback play as admirable as it's been, this inept?
Well, no.
Not with how well the defense is playing. The defense is a defense that is playing ready for a bowl game, and if not a bowl game, based on how the West has been this year, that's a defense that's playing well enough to get you to a Big Ten title game. It's been the offense that's been holding you back, and one more year of that, and you start worrying about what the long term is going to be.
Except it's not a defense that's good enough to get you to a Big Ten title game next year without divisions.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. I just looked in the recovery from the sports hernia surgery is about 6 to 12 weeks, according to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So I don't know why the University of Pittsburgh is an expert on this, but
what do the Germans say?
It would allow him, if he gets that done in December, to be ready for spring ball. It's not going to be a Casey Thompson kind of situation where he's on the sideline riding an exercise bike and doing mat drills during spring practice. So that's good. And if there's a competition between Chubba and the quarterback behind door number 1, then at least they can have that play out, which Thompson couldn't even do that.
And let's go. Look, I liked watching Casey Thompson play, but he also had the benefit of Trey Palmer and Marcus Washington last year that were very, very good receivers. Palmer was the fastest receiver in the Big Ten last year. You go along, I'll throw you the ball as far as I possibly can. You catch it and go for 271 yards against Purdue. So he benefited in areas that Nebraska has just not had.
And Iowa.
And Iowa this year, that Nebraska's quarterbacks have not had a veteran-type receiver group the way Casey Thompson did, which made him look really, really good and probably would have, he probably would have been a pretty good quarterback this year had he stayed in Nebraska. It did not happen. Here's another factor that comes in with the transfer portal, and I still think this is going to be a really big deal. NIL money. What kind of money is there going to be, and how skittish are sponsors, not just at Nebraska, although we can think of one in particular, but how skittish are businesses going to be in wanting to give up money for unknowns, right?
Well,
and that I think is going to be an issue as we continue to go on in this NIL era.
Well, I mean, we can be real about NIL, and there's the real NIL money that's used essentially in recruiting. Nobody over at the stadium said that, but there's that NIL money, and then there's the traditional NIL local business. You need to step up and support the player like Amigos did with Jeff Sims this year. The what entices the players to come as recruits out of the portal is the first one of those categories. And that is seemingly on solid ground for Nebraska, or it wouldn't be competing for high-dollar recruits from the portal, i.e. quarterbacks. The second part of NIL is a good point that you bring up, like the deals that maybe your number 3 wide receiver gets aren't going to. Those could start to become more sparse if Nebraska's not competing to play in at least bowl games. So it's an interesting discussion, but
you also have Happy Meal NIL money, if you know what I mean. Where here's a sandwich for you in this bag.
That's what the originators, the creators of NIL, thought things were going to be, and then
we thought that was going to go away. Well, they're back.
Players getting 10,000 times more than that now. So.
Couple of things we'll hit on before we wrap. We'll talk Nebraska, Iowa, but before we get into Black Friday, Matt Rhule today, as we taped this on Monday, talked about and answered about Tony White, and very supportive of Tony White. Hire the guy, but don't take a bad job. Just kind of paraphrasing Matt Rhule, but that was pretty interesting from Matt Rhule. As good as his coordinator has been, he is genuinely all about his guy going on to the next level. Thinks he's ready.
Yeah, this is just Matt Rhule. He's going to advocate for his assistant coaches, his coordinators to get head coaching jobs, his assistant coaches to get coordinator jobs, even if it's not at Nebraska. He's going to tell his players when they come in, and there's a lot of guys who are thinking about this right now who are listed as juniors on the roster and have a year of eligibility, or listed even sometimes as seniors on the roster and have a year of eligibility because COVID is still, messing with all of that. He's going to tell them to go to the NFL if he thinks at all, that they have the chance to be able to do that. So that's who he is, and he wants the best, and he understands also that by supporting his coaches and his players, that he's helping get the next wave, that he's making Nebraska a more attractive place for maybe a replacement who's better than the guy that he's sending off. And that's not the case. That's not the situation in the case of Tony White. He's not pushing him out the door because he thinks there's a better defensive coordinator out there. He just legitimately would like to see Tony White become a head coach. And that's an admirable trait. It's not one that all coaches have, certainly not in public, one that all coaches have. He was as outspoken about Tony White today in pushing for him to get a job as I think I've ever heard a head coach in this kind of a situation. We're not talking about where a guy's got 1 foot out the door and the head coach knows there's not a whole lot that he can do to keep him here, and he says, hey, good for him, he's awesome, da-da-da. This is somebody who, as far as I know, Tony has not been offered a job anywhere. He may be talking to Syracuse or talking to someone else, but they're not coming to decisions yet. And Rhule's, his number one cheerleader.
But the advice that he also expressed that he gave him and any coach that's under him, don't let expectations overshadow commitment. And I think when you look at some of the jobs that are open now, and specifically the job at Syracuse, where Tony White came from, I think you look at that and say, yeah, they may have high expectations, but that is always going to be a basketball school. And that may not be as good of a job as Tony White could probably get. And maybe it's better to be at Nebraska for another year as a defensive coordinator than it is to take a job like that. I think we talked about this maybe last week. There are still going to be jobs that are going to come available once we get through conference championship season and on into next year, whether schools have firings or coaches move on. Mississippi State being open, that's probably a pretty attractive job, although it's going to be tough to overtake anybody in the SEC necessarily, and I'm sure Dan Mullen probably would like to get that job back. But is there going to be a change at UCLA? That was always speculated last week prior to the USC game, and Chip Kelly seems to have turned it around. Right, but I think any time I think in California they're going to think offense first. But I think Tony White is going to have his chance at a really, really good job next year. A good job maybe this year, but if 2 years putting the black shirts together, I think that's really a significant opportunity.
In theory, Nebraska on defense should be able to build off this, regardless of who Nebraska loses. I mean, you could lose Ty Robinson, you're going to lose Quentin Newsome, you're going to lose Luke Reimer. There's all kinds of big pieces on this defense that are going to be moving on. But in theory, it should be better because it'll be another year in the system, and the way that he's coached this defense to build depth, year two should do even more for Tony White's resume. And I agree that he can do better than Syracuse. It's a Power 5 job. It's the ACC. That's a great step for a coordinator who has not been a head coach. It's a fantastic opportunity. But I think Tony White is good enough and will be attractive enough down the road that he can get a Big Ten or SEC job potentially as a first year or a first time head coach, maybe. And if not, a Big 12 job or something that just has a different kind of ceiling than where Syracuse is at.
Well, and if Matt Rhule goes to A&M.
He's Nebraska's next head coach. There it is.
Look at Bill.
Should have seen it coming.
Full circle.
I've been waiting to throw that little nugget on the...
We read that one on Message Board Geniuses the other day.
Yeah.
And
MessageBoardAD.com.
Gosh, I got a number of correspondences from panicked Nebraska observers about Matt Rhule going
What's
to A&M.
Mitch think?
What I think is that that's not happening. But hey, you never know. I mean, he would in a different situation would be an okay candidate there with his ties in the state of Texas. But I just
timing's not strong.
No.
They're not going to take a guy who was at Baylor. They don't want to take somebody who was at some other Texas school. Come on.
And they're not going to take a guy who's 5-6,
right,
on his way to perhaps 5-7.
That was my favorite thing I think I read over the weekend.
Hey, Nebraska's favored on Friday, though. Could be on the road to 5-7, but Vegas likes Nebraska.
And over-under's 8.75.
Under still.
Yes. 10-3. There we have it.
Yeah, go. I guess you can't bet on the game here locally in Lincoln, so make the trip to Council Bluffs and get your next house paid for.
Sure.
Under. Yeah. Put your current house on the under and buy yourself a new house.
28.5, is that what it is?
I believe it's 27.5.
So are now like the 5 lowest over-unders in the history of college football, all on 2023 Iowa?
This game, how it opened at least, I haven't checked how it's changed since this morning. But how it opened and where it was this morning, it is tied for the lowest total in college football history, along with Iowa, Minnesota earlier this season.
And yet Iowa Northwestern, too, that set football back as you talk to Northwestern and Iowa fans.
How about Iowa and Illinois? Also, that was a low.
That was a low number, but that was actually pretty entertaining in the fourth.
Oh, the game itself, yes. I'm just talking about the over-under, the line on
the total was really low. Let's dive into Iowa before we virtually hug and tell everyone to have a great Thanksgiving. Iowa, Nebraska. You have a little revenge in play for Iowa based on how last year went. You have the Hawkeyes looking for a 10th win. They want to send little Brian out, a winner, and no doubt have their eyes set on Indy. They're already there. They clinched that against Illinois. But this is going to be another cold and bitter Black Friday weather day, and I'm just interested to see if Nebraska can get it done 2 years in a row. Iowa's so good and so talented defensively. They did just enough offensively. Guys, if I'm picking, I look at Nebraska's defense kind of redeeming themselves. Not that they've been bad. They've just been not as great the last couple of Saturdays. And you have the Iowa offense that come in. They run a great counter that rips off long touchdown runs, but that's about it. Biscuits and gravy, Deacon Hill. I love that nickname. I've given it to him.
You know how bad Iowa's offense has been away from Kinnick this year?
Very.
Yeah, that's a rhetorical question. It's just been extremely bad, like shockingly bad. So
they're due.
But Nebraska, aside from Chubba putting the Superman cape on for a game and a drive,
the defense has been good.
Yes, Nebraska's offense has been not quite Iowa bad, but they're friends.
Well, did you say Chubba put the Superman cape on for a game and a drive?
Yeah,
it was like 3 drives. The second and third quarter was
in comparison, it's a Superman cape.
Yeah, just not turning the football over.
You are hating some Chubba Purdy today.
I think very low, Elijah.
The bar is low, but there's been such overreaction to Chubba.
Dude, it's a look.
He was solid.
He was, but even not in, bless Harburg. We got to preface everything by that, but he's looking like a guy that can make throws in this offense and is good with his legs.
Were we not saying the same thing about Heinrich following the Northern Illinois
game? Never said he looked great throwing the football, ever.
We said he could make the throws. We said he was taking care of the ball better than Jeff Sims.
We said he could run people over.
Yeah. He was a little Tebow-esque. That's what his calling card's been.
I'm still just not ready to anoint Chubba.
Chubba, and I'm not ready to anoint him either, but he has a look when he throws the ball, when he drops back, like he's decisive, and he actually throws a nice ball, and it's a spiral, and it goes to the receiver.
It's accurate.
Yeah.
And he's a little more elusive on the run. Harburg chooses to run over, and Purdy has been a little bit more elusive in shaking tackles and been a little more careful with the body as opposed to Harburg.
Anyway,
small sample size, yes.
Anyway, we were talking about Iowa. Did you catch today that Matt Rhule seems to have a very deep affinity for Brian Ferentz?
Big time respect. Loves his work on special teams, tight end, and the offensive line.
I thought he was getting a little misty-eyed.
Killed with kindness.
Yeah, talked about how hard it's got to be. He can't even imagine how hard it's got to be for Kirk Ferentz to watch his son get fired while he coaches out this season, and in what has been an outstanding season on the record-wise for Iowa. Rhule was he was emotional, I think, in feeling for Kirk and Brian, and that's
he tried to hire him several times.
He did.
But he also didn't say he tried to hire him as an offensive coordinator.
He did not try to hire him as an offensive
quarterback tutor.
He's the offensive line, tight ends coach,
run game coordinator.
I just thought of something in with Rhule talking about Ferentz. One quote today from Rhule, he said, "I couldn't be happier about where we are. I couldn't be angrier about our record."
Yeah.
I wonder if Iowa feels the opposite.
I think they probably do, because 9-2 is nothing to sneeze at, and they do it despite their offense.
They couldn't be happier about their record, and they couldn't be angrier about if you're talking about the head coach, about where they are with that record, that he's got to say goodbye to his son and offensive coordinator. And, how'd you like to be the guy who's going to come in and work for Kirk Ferentz? You got to fill Brian's shoes, and it's like, every time. Does
Brian have any brothers?
Every time he does. Every time you
Mitch has looked into it.
James Ferentz. Yeah, he played center at Iowa.
Can he call an outside zone? That's the question.
I think he's got some daughters too. So, Every time that the new offensive coordinator at Iowa, assuming Kirk hangs around, calls a bad play, they don't get a third down conversion, it's 3rd and 11, and they don't get it. You're just going to get this glare from Kirk, and you're just going to be thinking as the OC, oh my God. He's thinking about Brian and how Brian would have called that play. Everything.
Brian would have handed that sucker off.
Brian would have got it.
You're not living up to Brian. I mean, a guy could average 40 points a game, and it's there was that play in the second quarter where I really didn't like the call, and this is what Brian would have done.
Do you think Ferentz hangs it up after the season?
I think there's a real chance. And I think he might do it in a way that kind of gives a big middle finger to the Iowa administration too. What if he did it outside of the coaching carousel time and didn't allow them to go and get somebody, and then you end up with one of Kirk's guys, like LeVar Woods or Phil Parker.
Well, I mean, I think about this whole situation. Kirk Ferentz, he's got to feel hard-pressed. I mean, Brian as well, because you think about it, I compare it to an average job, which I know coaching in college football is not your run-of-the-mill job. It's completely different. But, imagine you're working at a bank. The bank regional manager comes in and fires you for your job performance, even though your branch manager is extremely happy with your performance. It's you're not living up to the Midwest standards for what we want for our bank. Well, my branch manager is having me do something completely different. I'm living up to his standards, but the regional guy comes in and fires me, even though he doesn't know what my day-to-day job responsibilities are. That's kind of what it feels like with Iowa.
You should go preach to Matt Rhule about that. He feels you. You guys are blood.
I mean, I understand it, though. I get it, and I'd feel pretty pissed off if I was Kirk Ferentz looking at that and saying, this new athletic director wants to come in and what coach in America doesn't have control over the hirings and firings within their own coaching staff, which is what it became with Brian Ferentz. And I understand the whole nepotism argument. It had to be that way, but I'd feel so angry if I was Kirk Ferentz saying, this guy is doing what I expected of him. We're going to a Big Ten championship game this year, a chance at being 10-2 because he is following out the offensive commandments that I've laid out for him, but the administration doesn't like how I want my offense to be run. They don't like that I'm winning football games, so now my son's got to go despite the fact that he's lived up to what I've wanted him to be as offensive coordinator. That would leave such a bad taste in my mouth.
If he wasn't his kid, Kirk would have made a change years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah, I think
the athletic director does not want the program to delve into mediocrity, okay?
Thank you for that.
We had to take into consideration where Nebraska was at. Hey, Kirk, and this is probably too in the weeds for people who are listening, but I'll say it anyway. Kirk, after the win against, was it Illinois? They played Illinois on Saturday. He made everybody wait 90 minutes before he came into the post-game press conference. Oh. And you know who was in the room the entire time waiting? Beth Getz, the AD, sitting there waiting to she's trying to show support for her coach, and Kirk knew she was in there. Oh, you better believe he knew she was in there. And everybody waited 90 minutes for him while he was enjoying that last home game of the season with his staff and his players. But that's not normal. Matt Rhule comes in about 10 minutes after the game. I missed him because I was stuck waiting for the elevator, if you remember. I think I told that story at Michigan State. Yeah. The same thing almost happened at Wisconsin. I was running down the tunnel to the Wisconsin Fieldhouse where the Nebraska press conference was at. So those are road games where the team has to get out of there, and Iowa was at home. But still, Kirk's not a happy camper right now.
No. Well, and did you see the first embrace after the win was Kirk went and found Brian. They went and had a long hug on the sideline because it felt like,
sit down and have a beer?
The end of an era. It really felt like not just the end. It didn't feel like Kirk sending Brian off and being like, we won the West. Going to give you a hug because you're gone. It really felt like one of those moments of look at all we've done here. We won this. It feels like a Kirk Ferentz swan song to me. It does.
We'll see.
And that could be a concern for Nebraska on Friday if it is a final game for Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. What type of performance are the Hawkeyes going to put up? The
saving grace is it's still Brian calling plays.
And when the Freedom Trophy is on the line, throw out the records.
Yeah. 2 in a row for Nebraska.
They've said it. I've heard that for years. Growing up, I always heard that when the Freedom Trophy's on the line.
I'm sorry. Black Friday is always Nebraska, Colorado. All right, there it is.
Nebraska, Oklahoma.
Sure, that too. Average Joe Sports Show, and find us on YouTube, The Average Joe Sports Show is what you type in. Subscribe, the AJ Sports Pod. Follow us on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you have...
I have one thing I want to add.
Well, no, go for it.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
Finish with the go ahead.
And Spotify and iTunes is where you also subscribe to the pod.
Please subscribe. I don't think we're going to get together before Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
And there is a significant game in the Big Ten on Saturday at Michigan Stadium.
Just a bit, yes.
We haven't talked anything about this, and we're not going to talk again before that game is played. So can we just a couple of minutes about Michigan, and Michigan almost lost on at Maryland.
Good old intentional grounding.
Yeah, it didn't come down to the last second, but Sharon Moore was sweating. Did he cry in the post game interview? I didn't see it. I didn't catch it. I was on the highway up to Madison from southern Wisconsin.
I did see that Michigan players were again wearing free Harbaugh shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what happens? You know what? I've changed my tune.
I think Ohio State wins.
I
just think their defense is a far cry from what it was a year ago, getting pushed around. It's year 2 with the Oklahoma State coordinator.
Knowles.
Yeah, Knowles. And they're incredible. And they've really kind of been the story of Ohio State this year. Henderson's been really nice. They are a little more run-oriented despite starving Marvin Jr. I mean, he's been incredible. The quarterback's come along and won and played in some big games. So I do all of that math. Pressure's been insanely enormous on Michigan. Yep. It almost tipped them over last week. Yep. They found a way. So give me Ohio State. Give me the points in Ohio State.
It looks to me like Michigan is finally feeling it.
Yeah.
There's been this pressure all year, and it wasn't a spectacular performance a few weeks ago against Purdue when the Boilers went into, and Ryan Walters, spitting anger went into the big house. That wasn't the dominant Michigan that we saw early in the year. Michigan that was rolling in October, I think beats Ohio State by 2 touchdowns. But this is a different team, and Jim Harbaugh's not going to be on the sideline, and I think that they're on their heels a bit. And
McCarthy's looked off.
He has, and missing some throws that he wasn't missing early in the year. Roman Wilson went out of the game against the Terps with what at least the radio announcers on the Michigan broadcast that I had on thought was a head injury. So we'll see if he can. He's a huge piece that Michigan needs going into the Ohio State game. So I think Ryan Day is going to get it done. And this season, there's going to be books written about this season and everything that went on between. This is one of the most amazing years in the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, in that it's so fitting that they're coming into this game undefeated. I was watching the Michigan-Maryland game before the final minutes. I stopped in Beloit, Wisconsin, and had lunch with some friends, and the game was on, and they're Nebraska supporters and really just fans of Big Ten football, and they were cheering on Maryland, rooting against the villains.
America's team,
Michigan. And I said, no, I want Michigan to win this because I want that to be 12-0 or 11-0 versus 11-0. I don't want this. That's the game. If Michigan's the villain and you want the villain to go down, have them go down against Ohio State, not against Maryland. That's not the game that they need to lose to make this a great story. So I'm glad that we're getting this after everything that's happened with. Ryan Day hiring the private. Oh wait, he didn't do that.
Timothy
turning them in, and needing the whoever gave that information to the NCAA about Michigan cheating. I don't know who that could have been, but it's been a spectacle, and I don't know that we truly have the right perspective on just how bizarre it's been while it's going on. Wait a couple years, and the documentaries start coming out about this year. And we're going to look back on this and go, can you believe that happened? And then wherever Jim Harbaugh is, he'll go, no, I can't believe it,
Wasn't there an HBO documentary a few years ago, The Game, on the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, which was fantastic. My guess is that they will be working on The Game 2 and using everything that they possibly can from this season to chronicle leading up to this weekend. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. puts himself perhaps at the forefront of the Heisman race with Bo Nix. I know Penix has had a great year, but I think that this will be a game that if he has 6-8 catches and a couple of touchdowns, 150 yards, that maybe this is the game that wins him the Heisman, much like it did when Eddie George stole the Heisman Trophy from Tommy Frazier in 1995. But I think that this is a showcase for Marvin Harrison Jr., and I'm also dead set certain that every sports talk show in Columbus, Ohio is booking Lou Holtz this week to just get Ryan Day agitated again so they can do what they did to Michigan like they did to Notre Dame earlier in the year.
I am not as high on Ohio State. I mean, you can make your point here, but
no, I was going to throw out the Nebraska-Iowa prediction. We want to.
Yeah, I want to get there in just a second, but I'm not as high on Ohio State. I think this is an ugly, low-scoring, 1990s-looking Big Ten game with two great defenses. Michigan's defense has been pretty much impervious all year long. Ohio State's defense, as Schmidt said, second year under Knowles, they've been phenomenal all year long. I think Michigan's going to turn to the ground game. J.J. McCarthy, he's an above-average quarterback. He's good for the Big Ten. He is not going to be the guy that stands in the pocket and picks apart the Ohio State secondary, not by any means, especially with Roman Wilson's health in question. He's really the focal point of that passing attack for Michigan. I think they're going to keep the ball on the ground early and often. I think Ohio State, they have some great playmakers. I still have a question mark at the quarterback spot with McCord. I think that Michigan defense is going to flex their muscle. This is going to be a lower scoring game, like somewhere in the 17-14 range, 20
like a Notre Dame one.
Yeah, it's going to be similar to that, where I think there's going to be a lot of great defense on display on Saturday. I think Michigan wins that type of football game. And I think they finished the year undefeated. If you remember, go back to 97. Nebraska was a fantastic team in 97. What happens at the end of the year? Missouri gives them all they can handle. Colorado gives them all they can handle. It's hard to put together 12 back-to-back phenomenal performances where you look like the number one team in the country.
Unless you have Michigan's schedule.
I mean, Michigan was due for an off week, though, especially between Penn State and Ohio State. I think they sleptwalked through that game a little bit. I think they're ready to play on Saturday morning, and I think they get the win. Probably somewhere in a 20-14.
Steak and a beer? You want a steak and a beer it right now?
I'll put an entire Thanksgiving dinner on this, Schmitty.
Well, I can't eat it. But apparently I can buy it.
So it's going to be a Rick Leach, Art Schlichter type game, and if I'm a betting man, I take Ohio State.
You got to take a heart.
Pun intended.
Iowa, Nebraska. Got a feel? Too early?
It's early, but I should probably say something since we're sitting here. I'm going with Iowa.
Yeah.
I just don't think that Nebraska wins in the intangible areas of the game. You know, you put the Nebraska offense against the Iowa defense. Obviously, that's a bad matchup. But the offense versus defense versus offense thing, just maybe that would even be something that I could see favoring Nebraska, 22 versus 22. But Torrey Taylor, I mean, he should be the Heisman winner, not Marvin Harrison. And
Bushini against Taylor.
Yeah, that's
not even a contest.
It's a mismatch. As much as I admire and like Brian Bushini, he hasn't been up to the level of many punters in the Big Ten this year, and he's about to face the best. You know, it's punter v. punter. In the battle of field position.
Put that on the marquee.
Punter v. punter.
It is punter v. This is a field position game, and that's the game that Iowa plays. So Taylor's going to be huge in this game for Iowa. I mean, Nebraska, how many times are they going to start inside their 10 on Friday?
They do it on average probably 4 or 5 times a game anyway.
Yeah, and that wears on a team. So I think Iowa, gets a cheap touchdown, like a 40-yard field or something like that, and wins 10-6.
Okay.
That might be overs.
I'm going to go 10-7 Iowa. I think special teams the difference, and it's going to be deja vu and deja vu and deja vu. Walk-off field goal for Iowa.
Do you guys remember the Iowa-South Dakota State game from last year? A really good South Dakota State defense against a really good...
That was a field-tipping game.
Yeah. I think this game on Friday feels very
Iowa started every
game.
drive at like the 50, and South Dakota State started all of them at the 2.
And I think Iowa picked up a grand total of like 4 first downs all game long against... Yeah. I think this game feels very similar to that one. I actually don't think we see a touchdown on Friday. I think we see field goals, and I think Iowa wins this football game 12-6.
Oh, that's too many points.
Albano replays his state championship performance for Omaha West Side a year ago, and a year later he caps off the 2023 regular season for Nebraska by booting them into a bowl game.
Look at Bill Doleman.
It's like an Alex Henry thing. Oh, that wasn't bowl eligibility.
9-7.
But it was Black Friday.
9-7. All right.
What's the forecast is saying?
38.
Oh.
36.
The snow appears to have moved out of the forecast, though.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Just know, if Iowa had lost on Saturday and Nebraska had won, that snow would have remained in the forecast. I said it last week. God has a sense of humor like that. If this was for the Big Ten West crown, it would have been snowing, but it's no longer, so God is going to take a break on all the Husker fans, and it's not going to be horrible weather. But alas, it's still going to be Big Ten West football.
I just had a feeling through, and I looked back yesterday on Sunday when I got home from Wisconsin, and we wrote these mid-season predictions back in early October. It was around the time of Nebraska's bye. And one of my predictions, I won't list all of them because there were some that were bad, But I did say that Nebraska Bowl eligibility was going to come down to Black Friday. And this season, at many points before, during, and late in the season, has felt like this was inevitable for Nebraska. I mean, it wasn't, because Nebraska could have easily won any one of the last 3 games, but I don't know. I don't see this team in a position right now to be able to beat Iowa at its own game, and that's the only way you can beat Iowa is to play their own game, unless you're Penn State or Michigan or Ohio State.
Well, regardless of what happens Friday, Mitch, that football game is still just the undercard for Husker volleyball at 3 o'clock against Wisconsin. There's the main event.
It is. Hey, I will say, if you're listening to this and it's Tuesday or Wednesday, go check out my story on Merritt Beeson and Lexi Rodriguez on The Athletic. Some great insight into who those two are, and this is an undefeated Nebraska volleyball team what a great fall it's been for Nebraska women's sports, with the soccer team going to the Elite Eight against Stanford, and the volleyball team aiming this weekend for an undefeated regular season, 27-0 outright Big Ten champs before they go to Wisconsin on Friday. I mean, it's not even that significant of a match for Nebraska on Friday. They're going to be the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. When the pairings come out, the bracket comes out Sunday. Really, they're just playing to extend the undefeated, keep that 0 on their record. But Merritt Beeson and Lexi Rodriguez are the engine that has kept this thing going all through the year. Incredible leaders for the Huskers. So really excited and happy to be able to write that story.
Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, from us to you. Happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy time with family and friends. Subscribe to the Average Joe Sports Show, the YouTube channel, the AJ Sports Pod on Twitter, Spotify, iTunes. Subscribe, download there, give us a review. And we'll be back with a special show on Sunday, maybe even a live pod.
That would be
We'll
awesome.
stream that and recap Nebraska, Iowa, and figure out if the holiday season's somewhere else, like the Oil Change Bowl, or it's home. It's home for the holidays.
Las Vegas.
Take care. That'd be good. We'll talk to you next time.